This time bringing you the 5 subclasses that I avoid in Baldur's Gate 3. As I'm working on my 8th playthrough now, I've had plenty of time to mess around with all sorts of characters and class and race combos, and there's a few things I've found that are a bit underwhelming to me personally. And while I would genuinely consider these some of the worst subclasses, in terms of this game specifically, I did want to mention right here at the beginning of the video that Baldur's Gate 3 is balanced in such a way that on normal difficulty, pretty much everything is viable, which is why I titled this video that I avoid these subclasses rather than that they are the worst, simply because if you still want to play any of these, they are definitely valid choices because of the way this game is balanced. And while playing them on Tactician might be a little hit or miss, even there, if you have enough time and patience to set things up, they are still viable for sure. But for one reason or another, they are nonetheless underwhelming compared to many of their counterparts. And in several cases, I think this is down to the fact that we're playing a video game in particular, as opposed to a tabletop experience where some of these would get more mileage. But with that out of the way, let's dive into these and talk about why I find them a bit underwhelming and generally avoid them. Starting with our first one, and this is the Transmutation Wizard. The reason I avoid this subclass is simply because the subclass features that they get are incredibly underwhelming compared to almost every other wizard school, where you can pick something like Evocation to completely avoid friendly fire with that wizard's spells, alongside later doing even more damage with them. By comparison, Transmutation subclass features are less than useful, and they don't even always work, because at level 2, when you would pick the subclass, they pick up Experimental Alchemy, which allows them to sometimes allow you to get 2 of a potion that you make via alchemy. You do have to pass a medicine check for this though, so it doesn't even work all the time. And combine that with the fact that potions of all kinds and types are readily available throughout the game, means that Experimental Alchemy is borderline useless, which is also kind of the case for their level 10 ability of Shape Changer, which allows them to turn into a blue jay to fly, but there's also multiple ways to give your character the ability to fly as well that wouldn't keep them from spell casting at the same time, with the only real upside to this being that it can be done at will. But again, it's so readily available that this isn't even that good. The one, I would say, saving grace if you really want to play Transmutation Wizard is their level 6 ability, the Transmuter Stone, which can either grant you resistance to an element or increase your movement speed, or give you dark vision, something like that. And that's very situationally useful, but not really worth taking this subclass for, in my opinion. Especially since even that can mostly be mitigated through, again, just potions and elixirs you can find. Second on the list, though, we have everyone's, I would say, least favorite cleric, the Trickery Cleric. The Trickery Cleric attempts to be a cleric that focuses on things like charms and illusions, but unfortunately it kind of just falls flat on a lot of those, as many of the domain spells it allows our cleric to cast, such as Mirror Image or Fear, Dimension Door, etc., are all things that can be easily found through scrolls that you hardly need a cleric to cast, which brings us to its subclass features: Blessing of the Trickster and Invoke Duplicity. Blessing of the Trickster allows you to grant another creature advantage on stealth checks, which is incredibly rare to need at all, and a character that you would be doing sneaking with that would be making a stealth check almost certainly doesn't need Blessing of the Trickster. And most stealth in this game can be entirely mitigated by simply drinking an invisibility potion, which are usually pretty readily available as well. So what about Invoke Duplicity? This one is situationally useful, as it allows us to summon a distraction that gives our allies advantage on attack rolls made to creatures within the vicinity of that distraction. So if you're standing right next to an enemy, that's a good way to get advantage for your entire team. But compared to other cleric domains, this just isn't that great. Tempest Cleric can get reactions to deal damage to enemies that hit them, War Cleric can get extra attacks, etc. So because of those things, Trickery Domain is just a really awkward subclass that just generally isn't worth the time, since most of what it tries to do can be easily done through other means that are not even related to any specific class. That makes justifying being a Trickery Cleric in this game very difficult to do, in my opinion. But nonetheless, that does bring us to our third subclass, which is the Eldritch Knight. The Eldritch Knight mixes fighter and wizard spells to make what is called a 1/3 caster. Being a fighter subclass, though, it's important to understand that the Eldritch Knight is mostly fighter and a little bit of wizard. And while I actually really enjoy this subclass in, for instance, the tabletop version of D&D, it unfortunately, I think, suffers from the availability of various scrolls in Baldur's Gate 3, because most of what this subclass does is just mitigated by the fact that spells are freely and easily available to everyone via scrolls, and the little bit you gain from this subclass that isn't just casting up to level 2 wizard spells just isn't really worth it. For instance, at level 3, they can bind their weapon to their main hand, which means they can't be disarmed, and if they throw it, it returns to them. The thing is, there's not a lot of enemies that try to disarm you, so that doesn't come up very often, and there are also specifically thrown weapons that will return to you every time as well, so you don't necessarily need this ability to do that. And then at level 7, they pick up War Magic, which allows them to cast a cantrip and then make a weapon attack as a bonus action. And while there are situations where you might want to do that, for instance, casting a firebolt cantrip at maybe something explosive and then attacking something next to you with a weapon, there's just not a lot of scenarios where just making all of your attacks as a fighter wouldn't deal more damage, especially since this only really applies to cantrips. And that's to say nothing of the fact that we have an extremely limited availability to spells, as a full level 12 character will only know 9 spells total from a very small list of wizard spells, up to level 2. And again, in the tabletop version, this is actually pretty useful, especially beyond just level 12, where your access to these might be limited, but we have access to all of these spells and much, much more via the numerous scrolls you can pick up while playing the game. And the one feature Eldritch Knight has that I do really like is unfortunately a little bit clunky in its execution as well. At level 10, they pick up Eldritch Strike, which allows them to hit a creature with a weapon attack and then give it disadvantage on its next saving throw against a spell from you until the end of your next turn. And while that's not bad, it's just a little bit clunky because you have to hit the enemy with your weapon first and then cast a spell, which you can't do with the same action, which means you either need to haste yourself or wait until your next turn to really do much with it. And while that's certainly not bad, it's just a little bit clunky for an ability that might let you do a little more damage if the target does actually fail its saving throw. And for all those reasons, while I enjoy this subclass in the tabletop version, the way Baldur's Gate 3 works and the wide availability of options to you mitigates most of the reasons you would ever want to use this. Which is almost the exact same case for our next class, which is the Arcane Trickster Rogue. Another 1/3 caster that I actually think is really cool in the tabletop version that unfortunately just doesn't translate to a video game quite as well. As they level up, they get access to up to level 2 wizard spells, again from a small but different list from the Eldritch Knight. In pretty much the exact same situation though, scrolls are readily available, we don't need to do this way, especially when we're only going up to level 2 spells. Though I will say I think this one is a little bit worse than the Eldritch Knight because basically everything it gets as subclass features is completely irrelevant. For instance, their coolest ability that they get right away when you pick the subclass with their improved Mage Hand allows them to cast Mage Hand, except now it is invisible and can carry out objects like pickpocketing other creatures or picking locks at range. And while that's cool in theory, especially in a tabletop setting, in a game like this, that just doesn't come up very often, and when it does, you could literally just drink an invisibility potion and do that yourself anyway. You don't need the Mage Hand to do that. Whereas in the tabletop setting, where that is not so readily available, it's a very different ballgame. But then we have their level 9 ability, Magical Ambush, which when we are hiding, enemies have disadvantage on saving throws against our spells. Again, not terrible, but not that great either, especially when we only have access to level 2 spells. Not to say it doesn't have its uses though, you could use that to sort of force disadvantage on a saving throw against like Hold Person or something to try to stun someone, as one example. So it's not unusable, it's just that a lot of its usefulness, like the Eldritch Knight, is simply mitigated by other game mechanics. Though that does finally bring us to our last entry, which is the Illusion Wizard. Another underwhelming wizard subclass because the only really useful thing it gets is at level 10, and even that isn't that great. At level 2, they pick up Improved Minor Illusion, which allows them to cast a distraction, known as Minor Illusion, as a bonus action, and it won't even interrupt their hiding if they are. Thing is, the only thing that you can really use Minor Illusion for is distracting someone, which means it's only really useful out of combat, where you could potentially use it to distract NPCs. But chances are you could probably do that anyway. You don't need to do it as a bonus action out of combat because that doesn't matter. And if you are in combat and actively sneaking, chances are your wizard isn't the one sneaking. So there's just not a lot of opportunities for that minor illusion to come up. And then at level 6, once per short rest as an action, they can cast See Invisibility without using a spell slot, but there are See Invisibility scrolls available. There is an in-game option to give you a permanent See Invisibility that is just always active, alongside potions that can grant this to you, etc. So again, just not a super useful ability. Now at level 10, they do get something useful. As a reaction, when they are attacked, they can make an illusory duplicate of themselves, causing the attack to miss. But you can only do that once per short rest, and compared to something like an Abjuration wizard's ability to use things like Shield to increase their AC or simply mitigate damage they do take, the ability to do this once per short rest is just not compelling, frankly. So again, compared to something like your Evocation wizard's ability to not hit everyone with their spells, picking up a few illusion spells that are highly situational and mostly mitigated by the game mechanics itself means that while yes, this subclass, like basically all the others, could be used to play through the game with, it is in my opinion one of the worst ones in the game, period. That though is pretty much going to do it for this video. There are 5 subclasses I avoid in Baldur's Gate 3 and my reasoning behind them, and again, if you want to play any of these, you should absolutely do so, because thanks to the way this game is balanced, they are all still very much so viable, with a few of them even being really fun from a roleplay standpoint, which, let's be honest, is where this game really shines more than anywhere else. And while that's pretty much going to do it for me, I would love to know what people think of these or other subclasses they avoid for any given reason, simply because you don't like the way it plays or you don't feel the cost-benefit reward of choosing that one is worthwhile, etc., etc., which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and